Funding for Lawmakers comes from
the University of West Georgia in Carrollton, ensuring a better life for Georgians in the 21st century. More than 100 programs of study prepare students for successful careers in the critical professions of education and nursing, as well as business and the liberal arts. The Georgia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of Georgia's business community, over 4,000 members strong, working with lawmakers for over 90 years to make sure that our state remains a place where companies thrive.
and by supporters of Georgia Public Broadcasting. Thank you.
Coming up on Lawmakers, the Senate Appropriations Committee passes its version of the 2010 budget. Looking for a compromise on the Transforming Transportation Investment Act, and final passage of the governor's initiative to increase salaries for Georgia's math and science teachers. Those stories and more are coming up next.
Live from Atlanta, this is Lawmakers. Here are your anchors, Wandy Lawson and David Zelski.
But I do think
Good evening, everyone. This is scheduled to be the final week of the 2009 legislative session. And as you see right there, the Senate remains in session at this hour, still debating some of the last issues on these final 3 legislative days. Well, also on tonight's program, the Senate approves a bill that would allow parents to send their children to any public school provided there is adequate space at that school. And an amendment is offered to a House bill to legalize Sunday sales of alcohol in Georgia. But first, our top story tonight, the 2010 budget clears the Senate Appropriations Committee. Senate Appropriations Committee gave a due pass to the $18.6 billion 2010 budget this morning. Committee Chairman Jack Hill spoke on the cuts and made the role of the federal stimulus money a point of what he was talking about.
House Bill 119 is the Senate version that you have on your desk to the 2010 general budget. Last week, I think you may remember, I spoke on the floor about the financial outlook for the state and the challenges that lay ahead for us. You may remember I showed you a chart, several charts, one of which outlined the shortfalls we face over the next 3 or 4 years and how the next 2 years' budgets really are tied together, particularly in how we appropriate stimulus funds, and that what we did in this budget could affect the 2011 budget. This morning, on the behalf of the Lieutenant Governor, the President Pro Tem, the Majority Leader, and the subcommittee chairs of the committee, we present you with a balanced 2010 budget with the most pressing needs of our state met. This budget has about $1.5 billion in agency cuts. There's no new taxes, with federal stimulus funds of at least $1.3 billion completely and prudently utilized. And we also have kept a sharp eye at making our state government more responsive, more self-sustaining, and continuing to shrink the size of state government.
And the full Senate is expected to vote on this budget this Wednesday. It can be assumed that the House will disagree with the Senate changes, so a conference committee will then be appointed with the goal of hammering out a compromise by day 40, expected this Friday.
Well, late last week, a House committee said no to a proposal backed by the governor to realign the state's leading transportation agency. Lawmakers Valerie Edwards has been following transportation legislation for us this session. She's live at the Capitol with this update. Valerie.
And Wandy, earlier this year, Governor Perdue said this, among other things, about transportation. He wanted to overhaul the DOT, take control of how its board members are selected, and fold the DOT into the appropriations process. In the plan sent back to the Senate late Friday afternoon, one thing the House agreed to is the last of these, meaning the DOT would have to face the General Assembly when appropriations time rolls around. In the meantime, while some in the General Assembly debate governance, advocates and some legislators say deciding who leads can wait. Instead, they say let's find some way to fund transportation improvements sooner rather than later.
So we want to encourage this leadership to come through and give Georgians some transportation relief. It impacts every aspect of life. And we're not talking about just in the business community anymore. It's getting to your children's events, it's getting home for your parents, it's getting home for your pets, you name it.
Bill Lingenfelter is transportation chair for the Georgia Chamber of Commerce, and his comments are being echoed by some House members, including House Minority Leader DeBose Porter.
We're more concerned about fixing transportation, and that has to do with the funding. To whether governance passes this year or not is not essential. Fixing the funding of it is essential.
Last week, the House did agree to what appears to be a compromise between what the two chambers want. While the Senate advocates a regional approach to transportation funding, the House wants to go with a statewide plan. The measure passed out of the House last week lets voters decide. And if they say no to a statewide 1-cent tax increase, neighboring communities could then decide on a regional solution. Right now, though, it appears the Senate is leaning toward governance as its top priority. Senate President Pro Tem Tommy Williams.
I'm saying that the governance bill is getting close. We still have some changes we need to make. I think the governor wants to weigh in with a few changes he wants to make, but I think it's doable. On the funding end, I think that's less doable at this time because we don't have the votes for the House position in the Senate.
Okay, guys, if you've been trying to keep up, get out a pen and I'll go over it one more time. On the issue of governance, the House radically changed this 102-page document to this 17-pager. The governor gets to choose someone to head long-range planning for the DOT, and just as the governor wanted, the DOT becomes subject to the appropriations process. But the General Assembly keeps control over board elections. On the issue of funding via a 1-cent tax, there's the Senate's regional approach and the House statewide plan. Reporting live for Lawmakers, I'm Valerie Edwards.
Okay, thanks again for that update, Valerie. Well, legislation dealing with several alcohol sales provisions was debated but eventually tabled by the Senate today. The issues within the bill include sales at the Gwinnett County Braves Stadium and opening a new package store within 500 yards of an existing package store. However, today's debate was based around an amendment from Senator Seth Harp, which allows local municipalities to vote on whether to allow alcohol sales on Sundays. Senator Seth Harp explains his amendment.
This allows the people in the local communities to make a decision, to make a selection, and have their voices heard. And folks, if they don't want it, they vote against it. And if they vote against it, it won't happen. This is protection for the communities that don't want to have alcohol sales on Sunday.
I would urge your favorable consideration of this amendment. It's time that we join 47 other states in treating our retailers fairly. And we need to bring the double standards and single company carve-outs to an end today.
Senator Steve Thompson backed up the bill's presenter, Senator Steve Henson, saying he doesn't want this Sunday sales provision because he believes the governor would end up vetoing the bill with this particular measure on it.
I agree with the senator from the 29th on his principle, but I think we know this governor's going to veto that bill. And if they're going to do it, why should we get in the middle of Gwinnett County's business?
However, an amendment from Senate Majority Caucus Chairman Dan Moody pushed forward Amendment 1A. This successfully gutted Senator Harp's Sunday sales provision and added a 2-year loss of license for first-time offenders of selling alcohol to minors. Harp also railed against this measure and asked for the Senate to reconsider.
Folks, this is your grocery store. This is your convenience store. This may be the restaurant you go to on Sunday. This may be the ballpark. How many underage people have had and bought a beer at Turner Field? One time. And Turner Field can't sell another beer. One time for 2 years, Turner Field can't sell liquor or beer or anything else.
We're talking about a license to sell one product in those stores. These stores can continue to sell peanuts. They can continue to sell peanut butter crackers, milk, coffee, ice cream, bread, all the things that they normally sell. They're not going to go out of business because they can still sell these other products.
And Senator Steve Thompson then motioned to leave this bill on the table. Before the final vote was made, that motion did pass 37-18, so HB 115 still awaits final passage.
Well, the House today agrees to Senate changes to the governor's plan to attract math and science teachers by supplementing their salaries. This marks final passage of House Bill 280, which provides a $4,500 bonus for first-year, highly qualified middle and high school math and science teachers. The measure allows elementary teachers to earn an additional $2,000 a year by receiving state math and science certification. The House voted 130 to 28 to support a clause added to HB 280 by the Senate, which says that the salary hike is subject to appropriations by the General Assembly. The bill now requires the governor's signature to become law.
Debate in the Senate over whether the state's $2,500 National Board certified teachers should continue to receive a 10% salary led to the reconsideration of House Bill 243. Senator Dan Weber presented Representative Pruitt's bill and expressed his belief that raises should be raised on teacher performance rather than merit. Lawmakers Tiana Fernandez has that story.
Senator Don Weber explained that there are currently two types of teachers that receive a 10% raise: those that have obtained their National Board certification and those that work in high-need schools.
This bill says that both those sets of teachers would continue to receive the pay increase. However, going forward, no additional teachers would.
In Senator Weber's explanation of moving forward, he says that this would not affect teachers that received their certification prior to June of 2006. Senator David Edelman stood in opposition to question the bill.
Why are we doing that? Why wouldn't we, at a minimum, leave that question open as to whether to have additional compensation for persons who might, in the future, enroll in the program?
Senator Vincent Fort also opposed the bill and took the well to express his concern.
You know, there are teachers in the pipeline or prospective teachers who either expect this program to be in place or ought to have this program available. And it's unfortunate that we're taking this option, we're moving the goalposts. And I'm going to ask, how can they depend, those teachers or prospective teachers, depend on our word when we continue to move the goalposts, continue to change the rules?
The first vote failed with a vote of 28 to 23, but in a reconsideration proposed by Senator Mitch Seabaugh, it passed by a vote of 32 to 22. The bill will now move back to Senate rules, where it could be placed back on the Senate calendar. Reporting for Lawmakers, I'm Tiana Fernandez.
Well, the Senate passed a measure today that would allow parents to send their children to any public school with the permission of the receiving school board. Lawmakers Brittany Evans joins us now with the latest on that measure. Brittany, what happened today?
Thanks, Nwandi. HB 251 is a change to the Quality Education Act. It tackles both inter-district and intra-district transferring. If the bill becomes law, students could transfer within their district and to adjacent districts with the approval of the new schools board. Parents would be responsible for transportation. The bill's Senate sponsor, Dan Weber, spoke in support of HB 251 today in the Well.
It's a very important principle here at stake. We all talk about wanting families to have choice. This is our chance to have some meaningful choice within public schools. It is this type of reform that is empowering families and recognizing that students have unique needs. And those needs may not be met by the local elementary school, middle school, or high school where you live. They should be given options. This is a bill about giving those families and those students options.
According to the bill, if a student transfers to an adjacent school district, the state and local funding would follow that student. Senator Vincent Fort spoke out against this bill for that very reason.
Takes local money from the school systems. It's kind of a backdoor way of grabbing at local money. That is my major concern, and it ought to be your major concern as well. The most important thing that this does in the Senate bill voucher language that came over from the House, it grabs that local money. I would suggest that you should not vote for this bill only on that issue.
House Bill 251 passed by a vote of 29 to 21 and now awaits the governor's signature. If he signs it, intra-district transfers will be effective for the 2009 and 2010 school year, and inter-district transfers will be effective the following school year.
All right, thanks very much for that report.
Thank you.
Well, the length of a school day could change in the near future, possibly even the number of days a week children go to school. Senator Jim Butterworth answers a few questions from Senator Vincent Ford about HB 193, which defines the length of a school year as 180 days or 1,520 hours.
The change to a 4-day school week cause severe or critical problems for families in any number of ways, particularly child care, etc. Is that a concern of yours? Would that not be a direct result of going to that 4-day school week that this would allow?
I have heard that concern, Senator, and the thing that I will tell you is that with those concerns that I've heard, I have spoken with all 8 superintendents in my district. All 8, in the first place, are for this bill. They are in agreement with the bill. Further, the consensus was if that issue becomes a problem, just like we kind of mentioned, they will address it. There were other comments that perhaps, and there are apparently some summertime programs that a couple of the school systems engage in that are actually USDA programs that provide for the free and reduced lunch program to address some of those concerns and that type issue. The thing that I heard from local administrators, the bottom line was that they will address the problem if that becomes an issue.
And HB 193 ended up passing 47-4 and now goes back to the House.
And the House today votes to require foreclosure deeds to be recorded within 90 days. Representative Mike Jacobs explains that cities and counties need the protection of Senate Bill 141 in the current economic climate. However, the House version of the bill eliminates the fines that were in the original bill.
The House Judiciary Committee noted that there is no requirement in the law whatsoever to file a deed in the first place. So we think by the simple requirement of filing a foreclosure deed that we may end up solving the problem by placing that requirement in the law without any excessive fines.
SB 141 passed 161-1. Changes made in the House Judiciary Committee send that measure back to the Senate. The House today approves a new option for property tax assessment appeals. Supporters of Senate Bill 240 say the current process is unfriendly to taxpayers. Lawmakers Emily Banks is live at the Capitol with the latest. Emily.
In Wandy, taxpayers would get the option of a binding arbitration appeal of their property tax assessment under Senate Bill 240. That is, if the taxpayer pays for an outside appraisal, and if the arbitrator rules in favor of the taxpayer, the county would pay for the arbitration. Representative Kevin Lividis explains how the system currently works.
You're putting the taxpayer now through an incredibly difficult and arcane process. First, they have to go to the Board of Assessors and appeal, where they'll lose. They go to the Board of Equalization, where they'll lose again. And the only other option for them is to spend money, unless they're going to represent themselves, on a lawyer, go through discovery, go through a court process, and by the time they're done with that, hopefully they've saved some money, but they probably spent a lot more on lawyers than they have on anything else. So instead of making lawyers rich, we're trying to put money back in taxpayers' pockets.
The bill passed 161-2, but wasn't the only piece of ad valorem tax legislation to pass the House today. It also overwhelmingly passed Senate Bill 55, which would allow tax assessors to consider more factors when determining fair market value of a property. Representative Martin Scott outlines the bill.
Number one, it's going to mandate that the assessor's office and your local county assessor's office take into consideration decreases in value in your homeowners' home values when they're assessing them and revaluing their properties based on foreclosures that are in your neighborhood. It also mandates that they take into consideration conservation easements and decreases in value as a result of that, as well as extending the deadline to file for conservation easements to June the 1st for this year.
Now, both these bills passed as House substitutes, so they'll have to go back to the Senate for another vote before they can go to the governor. Reporting live, I'm Emily Banks for Lawmakers.
Thanks for that report, Emily. Well, tax relief continues to be a key issue for Senate Majority Leader Chip Rogers. He held a press conference this morning to discuss a measure to double the homestead exemption. A similar measure passed the Senate earlier this session, and 2 versions have actually failed in the House recently, one as recent as last week. He says this is another chance for House Democrats who overwhelmingly voted against this measure last week.
We have been working, and I have been working almost solely on that issue during this session. This convoluted scheme of the state sending some form of check back to the local governments was created by the previous administration, frankly doesn't work. We've addressed that. I'm not sure if the former governor who says we haven't done anything on property taxes and blames it on Republicans saw the vote in the House last week. I'm sure someone would be happy to transmit him a copy. But the fact of the matter is, on almost a party line vote, the Republican Party stood up and said we need more property tax relief, and the Democratic Party said no. It is crystal clear. Maybe he hasn't kept up with the local news reports or the statewide news reports, but it's very clear what is happening here. We will give the other side another opportunity this week to vote on that same issue, as we will have legislation that will come to the floor dealing with the homeowners tax relief grant and putting it in its proper form, in the form of a statewide homestead exemption, which is the way it should have been done from the very beginning. And we'll give the other side an opportunity yet again to vote on whether they want to offer property tax relief. So on the one hand, we are stepping forward with a bold initiative to deliver real tax relief to create jobs in Georgia. And on the other hand, we are stepping forward and cleaning up what could only be characterized as a messy situation of granting property tax relief by sending a check to local governments with real property tax relief in the form of increasing the homestead exemption statewide. That legislation will again be before the Senate, and we will give the other side an opportunity to vote on that, and we will be the party of cutting taxes, as we always have.
In other news, the House today votes down a measure that would have allowed the sale of alcohol in public housing projects. Representative Sean Jurgensen says Senate Bill 68 is intended to benefit mixed-use communities.
Allow housing authorities, in conjunction with the municipality or the county, as they already have in Title III, to make determinations for the selling of alcohol for on-site consumption around housing authorities. Right now, they're specifically excluded from doing that, and this brings it into compliance with other sections of Title III.
But Representative Mickey Chanel, who owns retail stores, says the measure is unfair because it prevents liquor vendors from being located near each other.
Using this same measurement, if somebody has a liquor store on Peachtree Street and the other side of 7585 from Peachtree, somebody wants to open one, they can't, using this definition of a straight line.
SB 68 failed by a vote of 42 to 114. The House did give final passage to House Bill 123, which expands the definition of child molestation to include acts transmitted by the internet. A vote of 151 to 3 was the agreement to the Senate substitute to that measure. HB 123 now goes to the governor's desk. And for the second year, the House has also approved a ban on sanctuary cities, which offer protection to undocumented immigrants. SB 20 passed 124 to 28. Changes made in House committees send that measure back to the Senate. And the House also agreed with the Senate that driver's license exams should be given in English only. Representative James Mills presented Senate Bill 67.
This test that is given that we're talking about today has 20 questions. Now, you may not be fluent in English language if you come from another country, but you could certainly work with, I think, 20 questions.
One of the two Hispanic members of the House of Representatives, Pedro Marin, says the bill is anti-immigration.
There's no logical reason for this bill being introduced. Its sole purpose is to stigmatize and undermine specific communities of people who are different. It is an easy way to go back home and claim how pro-American you are.
Representative DuBose Porter opposes the bill as bad for international business.
When plants just completed an $80 million expansion in my county. It could have gone anywhere in the world, but it came to Georgia because historically we have been friendly and progressive in welcoming foreign investment.
SB 67 passed 104 to 58. Well, on an average day, the local calendar and privileged resolutions are approved in the House without debate. Today, Representative Bobby Franklin challenged the constitutionality of bills on both schedules. This forced every privileged resolution to be considered separately. Here's Representative Franklin opposing H.R. 578, which calls on the federal government to reevaluate endangered species along the Etowah River Basin.
Here we're requesting the United States Fish and Wildlife Service to do something that we never gave the federal government authority to do in the first place. So by definition, we're urging and requesting that the federal government do something unlawful, since we never authorized it in the Constitution. So when we're authorizing the federal government to do something unlawful, we're actually asking them to commit treason against the states that make up this great union that we all love.
And finally, in House news today, the House today passes legislation to promote the inclusion of biofuels in gasoline blends. But debate about Senate Bill 30 pitted rural and urban interests. Representative Jeff May presented the bill.
If Georgia creates renewable energy sources that adds 10% to the supply that's already available, I mean, common sense tells you that there's more supply in the market. It should make it easier. So there's a choice. You know, you continue to be happy with what's happened in the past. I know recently we paid as much as $5 a gallon for gasoline. Oil went up to, $150 a barrel. Thankfully now it's come down to $40 or $50 a barrel, but it's still $2 a gallon for gasoline.
Representative Don Wicks rose to oppose the measure, saying that SB 30 pits billionaires against millionaires.
We're talking about putting ethanol in a gallon of gasoline and selling it at what's called blend stock. The issue is they can do that now. They want to buy, one group wants to buy their own ethanol and then blend it off-site from the oil terminal. They can do that now. The issue is they want to be able to do it in the 45-county metropolitan Atlanta area.
House Democratic Leader DeBose Porter says SB 30 is an economic development issue.
And support those local producers throughout this state who are taking a risk and investing their time and money and resources to grow the millet, the sorghum, make the molasses. One plant's even using old Coca-Colas, things that are expired that can use the glucose in those to make ethanol here. This is about supporting Georgia workers, Georgia farmers, Georgia producers to have a market to buy that product here.
SB 30 passed 137 to 30 with one amendment. The measure now returns to the Senate.
And just a reminder, everyone, the Georgia General Assembly has adopted a 3-day schedule for this final week of the session, one we just told you about on this show. And for more information on that schedule, we encourage you to visit our website at gpb.org/lawmakers. We will continue to bring you all the latest Capitol news on legislative days. The final legislative day for the 2009 session of the Georgia General Assembly is scheduled for this Friday. We hope you will join Lawmakers Friday at 7 p.m. for our regular program, and also at 11 p.m. for our Sine Die special. And because the General Assembly is in recess tomorrow, Lawmakers returns on Wednesday, April 1st at 7 p.m. And if you have missed any part of this Lawmakers broadcast, tune in tomorrow morning when Lawmakers repeats at 5:30 a.m. on GPB or 7 a.m. on GPB Knowledge. You can also keep up with all the action under the Gold Dome Daily on your local GPB radio station during Morning Edition, All Things Considered, and Georgia Gazette. Well, coming up next here on GPB Television, Art Wolf's Travels to the Edge. Tonight's episode features Mongolia. That program is next here on GPB.
That's our broadcast for this, the 38th legislative day of the 2009 session of the Georgia General Assembly. I'm Wandy Lawson.
And I'm David Zelski. Join us Wednesday at 7 p.m. for Lawmakers. Good night. We now leave you with a little bit of the Senate.
And it expands the existing protections. We had not long ago an organization that was attempting to prosecute an abuse of over 50 people in a nursing home. And they were shocked, the police department was shocked to find out that there was an exception carved out in the code, in our criminal code, for those who actually reside in nursing homes. They don't share the same protection. So this bill does several things. One, it changes the definition.
This has been a production of Georgia Public Broadcasting.